The boxes were a monument to a life I no longer wanted. They stood in silent brown and tan towers in the cavernous living room, each one a cardboard tombstone for a memory of Laura. I'd told myself this was a tactical retreat, not a surrender. Trading the Chicago skyline for the jagged teeth of Maine's forests was supposed to be a reset, a forced disconnect from the ghosts of the city. Haven Creek. The name itself was a promise of sanctuary, a quiet place where a man could let his grief breathe without it echoing off skyscrapers. The house was part of the prescription. A 2-story Victorian relic at the end of a long gravel drive, slowly losing a war with the surrounding woods. Its white paint was peeling like sunburnt skin, and the porch sagged in a weary sigh, but it was solid. It had bones. As an architect, I could appreciate that. It was a project, something to occupy the hands while the mind healed. The realtor had mentioned the spotty cell service and non-existent high-speed internet as a drawback. For me, it was the primary selling point. I spent the first day in a fog of physical labor, hauling boxes, my muscles screaming in protest against the sudden activity. The air, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, was a welcome change from city exhaust. By evening, I was exhausted but had carved out a livable space in the chaos. My study, a small room overlooking the encroaching forest, was the first to be fully unpacked. Books on their shelves, drafting table assembled, a bottle of bourbon standing sentinel on the corner of the desk. All that was left was a stack of boxes marked Miss Storage. The attic seemed the logical destination. A pull cord in the upstairs hallway revealed a set of rickety folding stairs. I ascended into a wall of heat and the smell of ages, not the sweet scent of old paper and cedar, but the acrid tang of decay, dust, and mothballs. A single, grimy porthole window let in a sliver of the dying day, illuminating a galaxy of swirling dust motes. The space was a graveyard of forgotten things. Broken furniture, stacks of yellowed newspapers, a child's rocking horse with one eye missing. Tucked away in a corner, shrouded by a stiff gray tarpaulin, was a shape that didn't belong. It was too solid, too deliberate. I pulled the tarp away, the canvas crackling in protest. And there it was, a radio. It was a Philco, a 1940s cathedral-style model. A hulking beast of dark, polished wood and brass fittings. The dial was a glass semicircle with the names of forgotten cities printed in elegant script. It was absurdly heavy, a piece of furniture in its own right. It felt less like an appliance and more like an altar to a bygone era. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't genuinely experienced in a year, got the better of me. I grunted and heaved, wrestling the thing down the folding stairs and into my study. It looked magnificent on the credenza against the wall, a dark monolith in the sparsely furnished room. I spent a half-hour cleaning it, wiping away decades of grime, polishing the clouded glass of the dial. The power cord was frayed but intact. With a shrug, I plugged it into a surge protector. For a moment, nothing. Then, a low, resonant hum filled the room, and a row of vacuum tubes at the back began to glow with a warm orange light, like embers in a hearth. I twisted the large, weighted tuning knob. The speaker crackled to life, hissing and spitting a storm of static. I moved the dial slowly, the needle gliding past ghostly fragments of talk radio and foreign language broadcasts, none of it clear. It was a symphony of white noise, the sound of a dead cosmos. Then, just as I was about to give up, I hit a sweet spot. The static vanished, replaced by sound so crisp and clean it was physically jarring. A saxophone wailed a lonely bluesy tune, followed by a clarinet and the soft, steady rhythm of a brushed snare drum. It was jazz, the kind of music that belonged in a smoky, sepia-toned club from a century ago. The fidelity was impossible. There was no hiss, no pop, no waver. It sounded like it was being piped in directly from a modern studio, yet the music itself was an antique. I leaned back in my chair, intrigued, assuming a previous owner must have been a hobbyist who'd gutted and rebuilt the internals. A very, very good hobbyist. The song faded out with a final, mournful note from the sax. The silence that followed lasted only a second before a voice erupted from the speaker, a voice that belonged to the radio as surely as the glowing tubes inside it. It was a man's voice, impossibly cheerful, booming with the practiced, confident charisma of a golden-era showman. "And we're back, keeping the lights on for all you night owls here in Haven Creek. You're listening to the one and only, and this is your host with the most, Smiley Jack, coming to you live." I frowned. A local station? Out here? The signal was perfect, stronger than anything I'd picked up. "Time for a quick look at the community bulletin board," Smiley Jack continued, his voice laced with an almost manic glee. "A big get-well-soon to our dear friends the Davenports over at 251 Downing Street. Seems our old pals took an unscheduled flight down the stairs earlier today. Let's give a big round of applause to our listener, Tom, who's been watching those two fuss over their pristine lawn for years. Excellent work, Tom. A real go-getter. Maybe next time you'll see the job through. Lord knows their self-righteous gardening was getting on everyone's nerves." A canned applause track, tinny and thin, followed the announcement. I stared at the radio, the bourbon forgotten on my desk. The blood in my veins felt like it had turned to ice water. It wasn't just the cruelty of the joke. It was the specificity. The street name, the family name. This wasn't some college station shock jock airing edgy, generic bits. This was targeted, malicious. It felt personal. Who would broadcast something so vile, so specific? A wave of disgust washed over me, a feeling of being dirty just by listening. My hand shot out, my knuckles rapping against the hard wood as I twisted the knob. The radio clicked off. The silence that rushed back into the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was the quiet I had come here for, the peace I had craved. But now, it felt different. It felt charged, like the stillness before a storm. I woke with a headache pounding a dull, merciless rhythm against the inside of my skull. The events of the previous night felt surreal, a fever dream born of exhaustion, bourbon, and the unsettling ambience of the old house. Smiley Jack. The Davenports. Tom. It had to be a prank. Some local kids with a pirate transmitter, I reasoned. Their idea of humor as black as the Maine woods at midnight. I was the new guy in a small town. Maybe this was some twisted form of hazing. The logical part of my brain, the architect who believed in blueprints and solid foundations, clung to this explanation like a drowning man to a life raft. The house felt too quiet, too large. The silence I'd paid a premium for now seemed to press in on me, making me aware of my own breathing, the frantic beat of my own heart. I needed to get out. I needed noise, people, the mundane trappings of civilization to scrub the memory of that broadcast from my mind. A trip into town for groceries and supplies seemed like the perfect antidote. I drove my sedan down the long gravel drive, the tires crunching a steady rhythmic protest. Haven Creek's town center was a postcard from a forgotten decade. A single main street was flanked by brick-faced buildings housing a hardware store, a small market, a town hall with a peeling cupola, and a coffee shop with a simple wooden sign that read, Berries. The air was clean, the pace of life unhurried. It was exactly the peaceful diorama I had imagined. It was perfect. And that, for the first time, felt deeply unsettling. Barry's Coffee was the town's social hub. The scent of roasted beans and cinnamon was a comforting balm. A handful of older men sat at a corner table nursing mugs, their conversation a low murmur. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 50s with a formidable mustache, a weary kindness in his eyes, and an apron stained with the ghosts of 1,000 spilled lattes. This had to be Barry. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Just a black coffee to go," I said, forcing a casual smile. "I'm new in town. Just moved into the old Hemlock Place out on Ridge Road." Barry's eyebrows lifted. "The Hemlock Place? Wow, that's been empty a while. Welcome to Haven Creek. I'm Barry." He extended a large, warm hand. "Arthur," I said, shaking it. We exchanged the usual pleasantries. Where I was from, what brought me here. I kept my answers vague, citing a need for quiet and a change of pace. "Well, you found it," Barry said, handing me a steaming cup. "Not much happens around here. It's the main attraction." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I had to ask. I took a sip of the scalding coffee, buying myself a second. "Seems peaceful," I began, striving for an offhand tone. "Any local news I should know about? Don't want to be the ignorant new guy." Barry leaned against the counter, his friendly expression clouding over with a sigh. "Funny you should ask. Usually the biggest news is Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias. But we had a bit of a nasty turn this morning. You know, just a freak thing." I held my breath. "An older couple, the Davenports," he continued, his voice low. "Live over on Downing. Had a bad fall down their basement stairs. Both of them. Real shame. Broke a few bones, legs, and a hip, I heard. Paramedics took them over to the county hospital an hour or two ago." The cardboard cup in my hand felt like it was about to crumple. The name, the street, the incident, it was all there. "My God, that's terrible," I managed, my voice sounding hollow and distant to my own ears. Will they be okay?" "Should be," Barry said, polishing a glass with a towel. "Tough old birds? Word is, a wooden step just gave out, rotted right through. Can happen in these old houses." A rotted step. The explanation was so simple, so crushingly, terrifyingly rational. It was a perfect, logical reason for what had happened. It was an accident. But Smiley Jack's voice echoed in my head, full of spiteful glee. "Let's give a big round of applause to our listener, Tom. Excellent work, Tom." Did they have any trouble with anyone?" I asked, my words feeling clumsy and loud. "Any feuds? Neighbors?" Barry gave me a curious look. "The Davenports? Nah, kept to themselves, quiet as church mice. Nicest lawn on the block, though. Meticulous about it." The pristine lawn. My blood ran cold. The detail was too specific. "Is there a Tom living nearby?" I pressed, feeling a desperate need to find a connection. Any connection. Barry just shrugged, his brow furrowed in thought. "At Tom? Hell, son, this is small-town America. You can't throw a rock without hitting a Tom, a Dave, or a Mike. Can't say as I know one who had it in for the Davenports, though." I paid for my coffee, mumbled my thanks, and walked out of the shop, the little bell on the door tinkling mockingly behind me. The idyllic town I'd seen just minutes before now seemed like a facade, a painted backdrop for a play I didn't understand. The friendly faces of the townsfolk seemed like masks. Was one of them Tom? Was Barry in on it? The paranoia was a physical sensation, a prickling on my skin. The drive home was a blur. I parked the car and walked into my new house, my sanctuary. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was waiting. My eyes were drawn to the study, to the dark wooden cabinet of the Philco radio. It sat there, inert and silent, a piece of antique furniture. But it wasn't. It was a listening post, a mouthpiece, an artifact of some localized, malevolent force that wore the mask of coincidence. And I had brought it down from the attic and given it a place of honor in my home. That evening, the house grew dark around me. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in my study, a glass of bourbon in my hand, staring at the radio. The rational architect in me was screaming, presenting a dozen logical fallacies, 100 reasons why this was all a grand, elaborate coincidence. But the man who had heard Barry's casual confirmation of the Davenport's accident knew better. Coincidence has a shape, a limit. This was something else. This was a pattern. After a long internal battle, I made a decision. If this was a pattern, I would document it. I would apply the same methodical rigor I used to design a building to deconstruct this phenomenon. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. Then I retrieved the small silver digital voice recorder I used for taking notes on job sites. I placed it on the desk next to the radio, its small red light a single defiant eye in the gloom. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. I was no longer a curious tinkerer. I was an active participant, a willing listener. I turned the radio on. The warm orange glow of the tubes filled the study, casting long dancing shadows. The static hissed, and then, right on cue, the same impossibly clear jazz music filled the room. It was a different song this time, a jaunter tune with a playful piano melody, but the effect was the same. It was a prelude. I pressed the record button on my digital device. The music faded, and the voice boomed from the speaker. Smiley Jack here, ready to spin some more tunes and check in on our favorite little town. We've got a letter here from a loyal listener. Let's see. There was a theatrical rustle of paper. It's from Sam. Sam writes, Smiley Jack. I'm sick and tired of old man Henderson and his rusty pickup taking my favorite parking spot down at the diner every single morning. He's retired. He can park anywhere. Well, Sam, it sounds like you decided to take matters into your own hands. Our sources tell us Mr. Henderson's truck had a little trouble with its parking brake tonight. A lot of trouble. In fact, it decided to take a scenic tour of the ravine off Old Mill Road. That'll teach him to hog the good spots. Canned laughter followed, sounding more sinister than ever. My pen scratched furiously across the legal pad. Mr. Henderson, rusty pickup, parking spot at diner. Ravine, Old Mill Road, listener, Sam. And another note, Smiley Jack chirped. This one from a listener who wishes to remain anonymous. It seems someone was getting mighty tired of Mrs. Albright's fluffy little tabby cat using their prize-winning petunias as a litter box. Our listener writes that they decided to teach that cat how to fly. I bet it was a short flight. Keep those letters coming, folks. We love to hear about your community improvement projects. Mrs. Albright. Tabby cat, petunias. Taught it to fly, likely killed, disposed of. The broadcast continued for another hour, a grotesque parody of a small-town radio show, interspersed with more vintage music. When it finally signed off, I was left in a cold sweat, my legal pad filled with a catalog of petty cruelties and malevolent acts. The next few days fell into a horrifying new routine. By night, I was a scribe of the damned, huddled over the glowing radio, my digital recorder capturing every word while my pen flew across the page, documenting the evil deeds broadcast into the ether. By day, I became a reluctant, stealthy detective. I drove into town, my heart a cold, heavy lump in my chest, and I checked the stories. It was all true. Every last, sickening detail. I found Old Mill Road. The Hendersons' rusty Ford pickup was at the bottom of the ravine, crumpled like a tin can. The local sheriff's deputy, a young man with a bored expression, told a bystander it looked like the emergency brake cable finally rusted through. "Happens with these old trucks," he'd said with a shrug. I found Mrs. Albright's house. She was in her front yard, weeping, tacking a missing cat sign with a photo of a fluffy tabby to a telephone pole. "He just vanished," she sobbed to a sympathetic neighbor. "I'm so worried. The coyotes, you know." A broken fence at the Miller farm. The police report said vandalism. A rash of food poisoning traced back to a church potluck. A simple case of improperly stored potato salad. Every single incident announced by Smiley Jack had a corresponding real-world event, and each one was accompanied by a perfectly plausible, mundane, and logical explanation. Brakes fail. Animals wander off. Fences break. People make mistakes with mayonnaise. I was trapped in a prison of knowledge. I was the only person in Haven Creek who knew the truth. The only one who could see the sinister thread connecting these unfortunate accidents. But what could I do? Walk into the sheriff's office? "Excuse me, officer, but Mr. Henderson's truck didn't crash because of a faulty brake line. A ghost named Sam did it. My haunted radio told me so." They'd have me in a padded cell before I finished the sentence. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on my sanity. I stopped sleeping. Every creak of the old house was an approaching footstep. Every shadow in the corner of my eye was a lurking figure. I began to understand the nature of the radio. It wasn't just reporting on events. It was an instigator, a dark conductor orchestrating a symphony of malice. It found the petty grudges, the festering resentments, the dark little thoughts that fester in the corners of people's minds, and it gave them a voice. It encouraged them. It praised the Sams and Toms of the world, whether they were people or something else entirely, and rewarded them with public acclaim on its secret spectral airwaves. It was a broadcast system for the town's collective ID, a feedback loop of pure evil. Then, on the fourth night, the stakes were raised. "And now, friends, a special bulletin." Smiley Jack's voice was practically vibrating with excitement. "A message for our most ambitious listener. Our old pal Sam, not content with simple vehicular relocation, has been eyeing the Gulf station out on the highway. He thinks this sleepy town needs a real wake-up call, a little fire to brighten up the night. And tonight's the night for a fireworks show. He's got about half an hour to get the party started. Let's all hold our breath and cross our fingers for Sam. This is going to be one for the history books, folks." Panic seized me with icy claws. This wasn't a broken fence or a missing cat. A gas station. This was catastrophe. This was fire and shrapnel and death. My role as a passive, horrified observer was over. I couldn't just sit here and take notes while people were about to be incinerated. I had to do something. Anything. As if to underscore the gravity of the moment, the radio's usual jazz interlude was replaced by a new, chilling jingle. A deep, distorted voice like stones grinding together at the bottom of a well rumbled from the speaker. "You're listening to WCKD, Radio from the Pit. WCKD. Wicked." The confirmation was a punch to the gut, stripping away the last, flimsy veil of deniability. This wasn't a metaphor. This was a mission statement. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:38 p.m., half an hour. The countdown had begun. My mind raced, stumbling over possibilities. Call the police? What would I say? An anonymous tip? There's going to be a fire at the Gulf station. They might take it seriously. They might not. And what if they asked for my name? Arthur Graham, the new guy in town, the one who was just coincidentally at the scene of the Davenport's accident? No. The police were not an option, not yet. I had to go myself. I grabbed my car keys and the digital recorder from the desk, its little red light still blinking faithfully. I didn't know what my plan was. Warn them? Tackle this Sam to the ground? I just knew I couldn't stay in that house listening to the prelude to a disaster. I sprinted out the door and into my car, gravel spraying as I peeled out of the driveway and onto the dark, winding road. The Gulf station was about a 5-mile drive, situated on the lonely stretch of highway that bypassed the main town. It was a small 24-hour oasis of fluorescent light in the oppressive darkness of the Maine woods. As I got closer, my heart hammered against my ribs. I expected to see some shadowy figure skulking around with a gas can and a book of matches. A man named Sam, his face contorted in a mask of pyromaniacal glee. But as I pulled up, the scene was one of absolute mundane normalcy. A massive tanker truck was parked next to the underground storage tanks, its hoses connected. The driver, a burly man in a stained work jacket, was chatting with the young kid working the night shift inside the brightly lit convenience store. A single car was filling up at the far pump. Everything was calm. Everything was fine. I parked across the highway, killing my engine and lights, my car blending into the shadows of the trees. My eyes scanned the perimeter of the station, searching the darkness beyond the pools of light. Nothing. No Sam. No one hiding in the bushes. The clock on my dashboard read 11:52 p.m. 8 minutes. I watched, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The man at the far pump finished, paid, and drove off. The tanker driver finished his conversation, gave a lazy wave to the clerk, and walked back to his rig. He began the process of disconnecting the thick hoses, the heavy metal couplings clanking in the quiet night air. He coiled the main hose and secured it back onto the side of the tanker. Then he trudged back towards the store, presumably to settle the paperwork. The station was empty again. Just the lone clerk inside, probably reading a magazine. My eyes darted around, searching for the threat. Where was Sam? The clock ticked to 11:57. 3 minutes. Was it a dude? A false alarm? Then I saw it. It wasn't a person. It was a movement. The heavy-duty hose the driver had just secured back onto his truck twitched. It was a small, serpentine motion, like a snake shifting in its sleep. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace, it uncoiled itself and slithered off its rack, falling to the asphalt with a soft, rubbery thud. My blood turned to ice. I watched, mesmerized and horrified as the nozzle, which should have been inert, began to move. It scraped across the concrete, an invisible hand dragging it towards the uncapped fill port of the underground tank. But it missed. It came to rest beside it, pointing uselessly at the ground. And then the pump itself came to life. The lever on the side of the machine, the one a person has to physically lift and squeeze, moved on its own. It rose smoothly, silently, as if pulled by an unseen string. Gasoline began to pour from the nozzle. Not a trickle, but a gushing, steady stream splashing onto the concrete. A dark, iridescent puddle formed instantly, spreading with terrifying speed, shimmering under the fluorescent lights. It was flowing directly towards the massive tanker truck. Sam isn't a person, the thought screamed in my mind. It's a force, an unseen hand. The rationalizations, the doubts, they all burned away in that moment. I was seeing the impossible with my own eyes. The clerk was oblivious. The driver was still inside. The clock hit 11:59. No! The word was ripped from my throat. I threw my car door open and scrambled out, running across the 2-lane highway. I wasn't thinking. I was just moving. A primal instinct to stop the inevitable taking over. "Get out!" I screamed, my voice raw with terror. "Get away! It's going to blow!" I waved my arms like a madman, a frantic scarecrow silhouetted against my own headlights. The driver and the clerk both looked up, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance at the lunatic sprinting towards them. The moment they turned their heads towards me, it happened. A single brilliant spark materialized in the air directly above the spreading pool of gasoline. It wasn't from a faulty wire or a discarded cigarette. It appeared from nothing. A tiny, malevolent star of pure, blue-white energy, like a discharge of static electricity 1,000 times magnified. It hung there for a fraction of a second, beautiful and terrible. Then ignition. The world erupted in a silent, whooshing bloom of orange and yellow. The fire didn't spread. It detonated, a sheet of flame consuming the entire concrete island in an instant. It raced across the gas-soaked ground with a hungry roar, a living thing of pure heat, and slammed into the side of the tanker truck. The driver and the clerk, their annoyance turning to stark terror, scrambled backwards. I was halfway across the pavement, the wave of heat hitting me like a physical blow, staggering me and forcing me to my knees. The air itself seemed to be on fire, scorching my lungs with every gasp. The tanker, now fully engulfed in a roaring inferno, began to groan, the metal screaming under the intense pressure. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, the groan became a high-pitched shriek, and the world dissolved into light and sound. The explosion was absolute, a deafening, gut-punching boom that felt like it tore the fabric of the universe. The tanker truck ceased to exist, vaporizing into a mushroom cloud of fire and black smoke that billowed into the night sky. The blast wave hit me like a linebacker, lifting me off my feet and hurling me a dozen yards back across the highway, my body tumbling through the air like a rag doll. I landed hard on the gravel shoulder, the impact jarring every bone in my body. My ears rang with a high-pitched metallic whine, and the world swam in a dizzying, smoke-filled haze. Burning debris rained down around me, twisted pieces of metal, flaming chunks of tire, all of it clattering onto the asphalt. I pushed myself up, my body screaming in protest. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear the distant approaching wail of sirens. The gas station was gone, replaced by a crater of fire. I saw the driver and the clerk huddled together near the edge of the woods, alive. They were staring at the inferno, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, masks of disbelief and horror. By some miracle, no one was dead. My warning had given them the seconds they needed. The first police cruiser skidded to a stop, followed by a fire engine. The scene devolved into a controlled chaos of shouting men, spraying water, and flashing red and blue lights. They found me sitting on the shoulder, dazed, covered in dirt, my ears still ringing. I was the star witness. The interrogation, for that's what it was, took place in the back of a squad car that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The man asking the questions was a detective named Morrow. He was in his 50s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain. His eyes were tired, cynical, and missed nothing. "So let me get this straight, Mr. Graham," he said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. "You were just Out for a drive? At midnight? I couldn't sleep, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I was heading back home. And you just happened to see the gas hose fall off the truck and start pumping fuel all by itself? Yes. And then you, a man who just moved to town, decided to be a hero and run towards a massive fuel spill, screaming your head off? I saw what was happening. I thought it was going to explode. Morrow stared at me for a long time, his gaze unwavering. The driver and the clerk say the pump just started. No reason. The spark. They didn't see where it came from. Convenient, isn't it? An accident with no cause. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. You know what I think, Mr. Graham? I think it sounds crazy. I think it sounds like someone wanted to make sure there was a big fire, but maybe got cold feet about people getting hurt at the last second. Someone who was right here, on the scene, before it all went up. The implication was clear. In their eyes, I wasn't a hero. I was a suspect. My story was bizarre, illogical. I was the wild card, the new element in their quiet town. I was the only person with a story that didn't make sense, which, in a cop's world, made me the most likely culprit. An arsonist who played the part of the shocked bystander. They let me go hours later, after taking my statement for the third time and strongly advising me not to leave town. The sun was beginning to stain the eastern sky a bruised purple as I drove home. My body ached, my head throbbed, and a profound sense of despair had settled over me. I had seen the hand of this town's invisible demon. I had interfered. I had nearly died. And for my trouble, I was now the prime suspect in a federal crime. I walked into my house, the silence within its walls now feeling less like a threat and more like a tomb. I had failed. All I had done was trade my role as a secret listener for the role of a public scapegoat. The first thing I did when I got inside was pour a whiskey, a large one. My hands were shaking so violently that the neck of the bottle rattled against the rim of the glass. The alcohol did little to calm the tremor. It felt like my entire nervous system was a frayed wire, humming with a terrifying energy. I walked into the study and stood before the Philco radio. It was just a box of wood and wires, silent and dark. But I knew better. It was a conduit. A microphone for a malevolent god. I had to know what it was saying. I had to know if my intervention had gone unnoticed in its infernal broadcast. With a deep, shuddering breath, I reached out and turned the knob. The warm glow, the familiar hum, the introductory jazz tune, it was all the same, a grotesque parody of normalcy. It was like tuning into a sitcom after watching a live execution. Then, the music faded. Well, 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 my fine-feathered fiends. Smiley Jack's voice boomed, more manic than ever. What a night in Haven Creek. Our boy Sam really outdid himself, didn't he? The old Gulf station is looking a little toasty. It's nothing but a beautiful, smoldering barbecue pit on the edge of town. A round of applause for Sam. What a showman. The tinny applause track played, and my stomach twisted into a knot. They were celebrating it, bragging about it. However, Smiley Jack continued, and the cheerfulness in his voice was suddenly replaced by a sharp metallic edge. The change was so abrupt it was like a physical blow. The evening's festivities were slightly marred. It seems we have a new player in our little game, a trespasser. Someone who decided to stick his nose where it doesn't belong and prevent our little bonfire from reaching its full, glorious potential. I froze, the glass halfway to my lips. There were no casualties, the voice continued, dripping with disappointment and contempt. And that, my friends, is just plain boring, isn't it? A party with no party favors? My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. He was talking about me. "But we here at WCKD, radio from the pit, we don't appreciate party crashers," Smiley Jack said, his voice now a low, menacing purr. "And we know who you are, trespasser. We know where you live." And then, with chilling, deliberate clarity, he spoke my address. "Arthur Graham, the old Hemlock Place, 1412 Ridge Road." The world tilted on its axis. My name, my address. He said my name. The whiskey glass slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound swallowed by the voice from the radio. "Don't you worry your pretty little head, Art," the voice cooed, the friendly nickname a venomous caress. "We don't let transgressions like this go unpunished. It's just not good broadcasting. Our good old friend Bob is already on his way to teach you a lesson in local etiquette. He just loves dealing with meddlers. He's a real hands-on kind of guy. So you sit tight. And while we wait for Bob to arrive, here's a little music to calm your nerves." A jaunty big band number erupted from the speaker, the brassy, upbeat sound an obscene counterpoint to the mortal terror that had just been pronounced upon me. I scrambled backwards, my feet tangling, and fell against my desk. I stared at the radio, at the glowing dial that was both my accuser and my judge. They knew. They knew everything. They knew I had interfered. They knew my name. They knew where I was. And they had dispatched something, or someone, named Bob, to my doorstep. My mind screamed one coherent thought through the blizzard of panic. "Run!" I ripped the radio's plug from the wall socket, silencing the cheerful music. The sudden quiet was terrifying. I lurched to my feet and stumbled towards the front door, my only thought to get to my car, to drive. To put as many miles between me and this cursed town as possible. The police thought I was a suspect. Fine. Let them. Better a fugitive than whatever Bob was. My hand was on the doorknob, the cold brass a shocking anchor to reality. I was about to turn it, to throw the door open and sprint into the pre-dawn gloom. And then I heard it. From outside, on the gravel driveway that led to my front porch. A distinct, heavy crunch, followed by another. The sound of something impossibly heavy taking its first step onto my property. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the crunch of a boot on gravel. It was heavier, deeper, punctuated by a scraping noise, as if whatever was walking was dragging sharpened points through the stones. I yanked my hand back from the doorknob as if it were red hot. I flicked off the entryway light, plunging the front of the house into darkness. On trembling legs, I crept to the living room window, my body pressed flat against the wall, and peered through the narrow gap between the curtain and the frame. The moon was a pale, sickly crescent, casting long, skeletal shadows across the lawn. At first, I saw nothing but the familiar shapes of the trees and the empty drive. Then a shadow detached itself from the larger darkness beneath the ancient oak. It moved into a patch of weak moonlight, and the air left my lungs in a silent, strangled gasp. This was not a man named Bob. It was immense, standing on two legs but hunched over, its form a nightmarish distortion of the human silhouette. It stood at least 7 feet tall, even with its stooped posture, and was covered in coarse, dark fur that seemed to drink the light. Its arms were too long, ending in thick, clawed hands that dangled almost to its knees. It took another step, and I saw the source of the scraping sound. Its feet were massive, canine paws, and its claws were like railroad spikes digging into my driveway. It turned its head, surveying the house, and I saw its face. It was a hellish fusion of wolf and man, with a long, lupine snout filled with yellow, dagger-like teeth. A string of saliva dripped from its jowls. But the most terrifying part was its eyes. They weren't the mindless eyes of a beast. They burned with a malevolent, yellow light, and they were filled with a cold, intelligent hatred. They scanned the dark windows of my house, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that they were looking for me. This was Old Man Bob. The creature moved with a loping, unnatural gait towards the front door. It didn't knock. It reached up with one of its clawed hands and raked it down the thick oak, the sound of splintering wood like a gunshot in the silent night. 4 deep gouges appeared in the door. Then it lowered its shoulder and threw its massive weight against it. The entire doorframe groaned in protest, the wood cracking. Panic, raw and pure, finally broke my paralysis. The door wouldn't hold. I scrambled away from the window, my mind a frantic scramble for options. Barricade. I needed to buy time. I shoved my full weight against the heavy oak sideboard in the hall, grunting with effort as I slid it in front of the splintering door. Another thunderous impact from outside sent vibrations through the floorboards. I ran through the house like a madman, overturning a tall, heavy bookshelf, its contents crashing to the floor. The noise was deafening, but it was nothing compared to the furious, guttural roar from outside. The beast knew I was inside. It knew I was fighting back. A new sound. The shattering of glass. A window in the dining room exploded inwards, spraying shards across the floor. I saw a huge furred arm snake through the broken frame, claws extended, swiping blindly at the air inside. It was testing, searching for a way in. I was trapped. The front was blocked, and the sides were now being breached. The back door. The kitchen. It was my only way out. I turned to run, and my eyes fell on the study, on the dark, silent form of the Philco radio sitting on the credenza. A completely insane, irrational thought flashed through my brain, a flicker of instinct overriding all logic. It was the source of this nightmare. It was the reason this thing was trying to tear its way into my house. But it was also the only tangible piece of this madness I possessed. Maybe it was the key. I didn't question it. I lunged into the study, grabbed the impossibly heavy radio, cradling it in my arms like a cumbersome wooden child. The weight of it was both an anchor and a burden. Behind me, I heard a tremendous crash as the living room window gave way completely, followed by the thud of the creature landing inside my house. There was no more time. Clutching the cursed radio, I bolted for the kitchen and the back door, my only hope for escape. I threw my shoulder against the back door, bursting out into the cold, damp air of the yard. The roar from inside the house was immediate, a sound of fury and thwarted rage. I didn't look back. I had seconds, maybe less. The manicured lawn ended abruptly 20 yards from the house, where the dark, tangled maw of the forest began. It was my only option. I ran. The radio, heavy and awkward, banged against my ribs with every stride. My lungs burned. I plunged into the trees, the darkness swallowing me whole. Branches whipped at my face and arms, snagging my clothes, their thorny fingers trying to hold me back. The forest floor was a treacherous carpet of roots and rocks, and I stumbled, nearly dropping the radio, catching myself on a tree trunk just in time. Behind me, the chase began. I heard it more than I saw it, the explosive sound of a sapling snapping in two, the heavy rhythmic thud of its powerful legs eating up the ground between us. A low, guttural growl, a predator's sound, seemed to come from all directions at once. It was faster than me. It knew this terrain. In the dark, I was a clumsy intruder. It was the apex predator. My flight became a desperate, panicked game of survival. I didn't run in a straight line. I weaved between the massive trunks of pines and oaks, using the terrain as my only defense. I ducked behind a large, moss-covered boulder, my breath coming in ragged, painful sobs, and listened. The thudding footsteps stopped. The forest was silent, save for the frantic drumming of my own heart. Then a soft rustle of leaves to my left. I bolted again. The creature was toying with me, hurting me. I could hear its heavy, panting breaths, smell its rank, musky scent on the air. It was close. So close. Oh. My legs were jelly, my body screaming for me to stop, to give up. But adrenaline and sheer terror pushed me onward. Through a break in the trees, I saw it. A pale ribbon of light. Not the moon. Artificial light. It was the highway, the one that ran past the Gulf station. It had to be a mile, maybe more, from my house through the woods. It was my only chance. I summoned the last dregs of my strength and made a final, desperate sprint toward the lights. I broke through the last line of trees, tripping over a root and tumbling out of the forest, rolling onto the gravel shoulder of the highway. I lay there for a second, gasping, my body a constellation of pain, the heavy radio miraculously still clutched in my arms. In the distance, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness, growing larger. A truck. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the searing pain in my ankle, and stumbled into the middle of the road. I waved my arms frantically, a mad, disheveled figure appearing out of the woods in the dead of night. The truck, an old, beat-up pickup, bore down on me, its horn blaring. With a deafening screech of tortured brakes, it swerved and skidded to a halt just feet away from me. The driver's side window rolled down. "What in the hell is wrong with you, boy?" a grizzled voice shouted. Behind the wheel was an older man, maybe 60, with a thick gray mustache and a face etched with the lines of 1,000,000 miles of road. "You trying to get yourself killed? What are you running from?" I couldn't form words. I just pointed a trembling finger back at the dark, menacing tree line from which I had just emerged. The driver, seeing the genuine animal terror in my eyes, the scratches on my face, the strange antique radio clutched to my chest, seemed to understand that this was more than a drunk's midnight stroll. "Get in," he grunted, leaning over and pushing the passenger door open from the inside. I didn't need a second invitation. I scrambled into the cab, hauling the radio in after me, and slammed the door shut. "Go!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Please, just drive fast." The driver, a man who later introduced himself as Silas, shot me a look that was 1 part pity and 2 parts profound suspicion. "Running from a bear, were you?" he asked, but his foot stomped on the gas pedal. The old pickup's engine roared in protest, and we peeled away from the shoulder, tires spitting gravel. I just shook my head, my chest heaving, trying to catch my breath. I risked a glance out the back window. The edge of the forest was an impenetrable wall of black. Nothing. Maybe I'd lost it. Maybe the open road was safety. We hadn't gone half a mile when an earth-shattering crump sounded from directly above us. The entire truck sagged on its suspension, the metal roof groaning and visibly bowing inwards with a shriek of tortured steel. Something impossibly heavy had just landed on us. "What was that?" Silas yelled, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he fought to keep the swerving truck on the road. "A tree branch fall?" But I saw it. Silas couldn't, but I could. Framed in the top of the windshield, looking down at us upside down, was the face of the beast. Its yellow, hate-filled eyes were locked on mine. Hot, foul breath fogged the glass in front of its snout. It was like it existed on a different plane of reality, a horror visible only to its chosen prey. The rest of the world just felt its effects. A sudden, inexplicable weight. A vehicle swerving for no reason. "Don't stop! Speed up!" I screamed, my voice raw. I knew if the truck stopped, those claws would tear through the thin metal roof like it was aluminum foil. Silas was panicking, his eyes wide with terror as he wrestled with the vehicle. He started to slow down, his instinct telling him to stop and assess the damage. That was the last thing we could afford. In a moment of pure, desperate instinct, I lunged across the bench seat, grabbed the steering wheel, and yanked it hard to the right. "Are you crazy?" Silas roared as the pickup careened violently across the lane. The sudden sharp turn was enough. The massive weight on the roof shifted. I heard the sickening scrape of claws on metal as the beast fought for purchase. And then, with a heavy final thud, it slid off the side of the truck. I saw its dark, sprawling form hit the asphalt and tumble end over end in the rearview mirror before being swallowed by the darkness behind us. Silas, terrified and furious, wrestled back control of the wheel, straightening us out. "You try a stunt like that again and I'll throw you out of this truck myself," he yelled, his voice shaking. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely function. The Philco radio was on my lap, its dead weight a strange comfort. On a wild, desperate hunch, my fingers found the knob and twisted it. The radio crackled to life instantly. No static, no search, just the voice. "Seems our trespasser is a slippery one," Smiley Jack's voice snarled, laced with genuine irritation. "But don't you worry, folks. Old Man Bob is very, very persistent." We were approaching a bridge, a large steel truss structure that spanned the wide, dark waters of the Penobscot River. It was the unofficial line, the marker that separated Haven Creek's county from the next. I glanced in the side mirror again. My heart stopped. Far behind us, illuminated for a split second by a piece of reflective road signage, a dark figure was rising from the pavement. It stood, and then it began to run, its loping, unnatural gait covering ground with terrifying speed. It was catching up. "Faster," I whispered to Silas, my eyes glued to the mirror. "We have to get across that bridge." Silas didn't ask why. He saw the look on my face, heard the dead certainty in my voice, and he floored it. The old truck roared, hurtling towards the entrance of the bridge as the dark shape in the mirror grew larger and larger. The tires hummed as they hit the metal grid of the bridge deck. The steel girders flashed past the windows like the ribs of some colossal skeleton. I watched the side mirror, my breath held tight in my chest. The wolf creature was closing the distance, a nightmare of fur and claw sprinting under the dim bridge lights. It was just yards from the back of the pickup. Then, as the truck passed the exact center of the bridge, the highest point of its arch, something happened. The Philco radio in my lap let out a deafening crack, like a whip snapping so loud it made both me and Silas jump. A puff of acrid smoke, smelling of burnt ozone and ancient dust, vented from the speaker grill. The warm orange glow of the vacuum tubes inside winked out. The voice of Smiley Jack was silenced mid-sentence. I looked back in the mirror. The creature had stopped. It stood at the very beginning of the bridge, not a single step onto the structure itself. It stood there, panting, its massive form silhouetted against the dark road. It stared after us, not with rage, but with a kind of thwarted stillness, as if it had run headlong into an invisible, unbreakable wall. It was bound. Its power, its very existence, ended at the county line. As we reached the far side of the bridge, I watched its form begin to waver, to lose its solidity, before it dissolved completely into the night, like smoke on the wind. It was over. The hunt was over. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for the last hour. A ragged, shuddering sob of relief. The radio in my lap was silent. Truly silent. Not just off. It felt dead. The presence within it was gone. I had escaped. I had crossed the border of hell and was back in the mortal world. Silas didn't say a word. He drove for another 2 miles, his hands locked on the wheel, until the cheerful, welcoming lights of an all-night diner appeared on the horizon. He pulled the pickup into the brightly lit parking lot, the crunch of the tires on the gravel the only sound, and put the truck in park. He turned and looked at me, his face pale and drawn in the neon glow. "I don't know who you are, son," he said, his voice quiet and shaky. "And I don't want to know what the hell that was. But this is as far as I take you. Get out." It wasn't said with malice, but with the profound fear of a man who had just grazed the edge of a world he never wanted to know existed. I nodded, unable to blame him. I gathered the heavy, inert radio in my arms and slid out of the cab. "Thank you, Silas," I said. He just grunted, put the truck in gear, and pulled out of the parking lot without a backward glance, leaving me standing alone under the buzzing neon sign. I was safe. I was alive. But my world was fractured beyond repair. The neat, orderly lines of logic and reason that had defined my entire life had been erased. Evil was real. It had a name, a voice, and a physical zip code. And it lived in a sleepy, picturesque town called Haven Creek. I looked down at the dead radio in my arms. What was I supposed to do with it? Smash it to pieces? Bury it? It was a trophy from a war I hadn't known I was fighting. But destroying it felt wrong. It was evidence. It was the key. I walked over to a wooden bench near the diner's entrance and sat down, the heavy radio on the seat beside me. I was a man with no home, a suspect in an arson case and the sole possessor of a monstrous truth. I had run. I had survived. But I hadn't won. The broadcast might be silent for me, but back across that bridge, in the town of Haven Creek, the jazz was still playing. Smiley Jack was still taking requests, and the accidents would continue. I stared down the dark, empty highway, the road that led back towards the bridge, back towards the town. My escape felt hollow, a temporary reprieve. This wasn't over. I couldn't let it be. My fight with WCKD, with Haven Creek, had only just begun.